Sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most extraordinary people. When Sarah Martinez stepped off the dusty bus in a remote village, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and wearing a simple blue dress, no one would have guessed she was anything more than a worried wife visiting her deployed husband. The local children barely glanced up from their games. The shopkeepers continued their daily routines. Even the armed guards at the military checkpoint waved her through with bored expressions. They had no idea they were looking at a woman who could calculate wind speed, distance, and trajectory in seconds. A woman whose steady hands had never trembled, even under the most intense pressure. A woman who had spent years perfecting skills that most people only saw in movies. In exactly 47 minutes, that quiet village would erupt into chaos. Gunfire would shatter the peaceful afternoon air. Trained soldiers would scramble for cover. And Sarah Martinez, the unassuming wife in the blue dress, would do something that would be talked about in military circles for decades to come. But first, she had a husband to find. And as she walked down that dusty street, adjusting the strap of her seemingly innocent handbag, Sarah had no idea that this simple visit would test every skill she had ever learned, every instinct she had ever trusted, and every limit she thought she had. The ambush was already in motion, the trap was already set, and Sarah Martinez was walking straight into the deadliest 47 minutes of her life. Sarah Martinez had always been good at keeping secrets. Growing up as the youngest daughter in a family of 5 children, she learned early how to blend into the background, how to observe without being noticed, and how to keep her thoughts to herself. These skills, which seemed so ordinary in childhood, would later prove to be far more valuable than anyone could have imagined. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Sarah was grading math tests in her small apartment in Denver. The voice on the other end belonged to Captain Williams, her husband's commanding officer. The words hit her like ice water. "Mrs. Martinez, there's been an incident. We need you to come immediately." James Martinez had been deployed to a volatile region in Eastern Europe for 6 months. Their communication had been limited to brief phone calls and carefully censored emails. Sarah knew the dangers, but had learned to push those worries into a corner of her mind where she could function normally. Now those fears crashed forward all at once. "Is he alive?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He's alive, but the situation is complicated. We can't discuss details over the phone. Can you be on a plane tonight?" Sarah looked around her neat little apartment, at the stack of papers waiting to be graded, at the coffee mug still warm in her hands. Her normal life suddenly felt like something from another world. "I'll be there." What Captain Williams didn't tell her was that James hadn't just been injured in a random attack. He had stumbled onto something much bigger, something that certain people were willing to kill for. And what he definitely didn't know was that Sarah Martinez was far more prepared for this journey than anyone could have guessed. The flight to Europe was long and turbulent. Sarah spent most of it staring out the window, remembering things she had tried to forget. She thought about her father, who had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. Not the casual weekend target practice that some families enjoyed, but serious, methodical training that built skills most people never needed.
"Accuracy isn't about the gun," he used to say, adjusting her stance on their property outside Colorado Springs.
"It's about breathing, patience, and knowing exactly what you want to accomplish before you pull the trigger." Her father had been a quiet man who worked as a mechanic during the day and disappeared for weeks at a time on jobs he never discussed. Sarah didn't learn until after his death that he had spent 20 years in special operations, and that the shooting lessons in their backyard had been far more advanced than anything taught in basic military training. She thought about the competitions she had won in high school and college, always entered under her maiden name, always keeping quiet about her abilities. She had learned that being exceptionally good at shooting made people uncomfortable, especially when you were a young woman who looked like you spent your time baking cookies rather than calculating bullet trajectories. Most of all, she thought about James, and how she had never told him about any of it. They had met at a coffee shop near the university where she was finishing her teaching degree. He was on leave from the army, visiting a friend, and he spilled his drink trying to get her attention. She found his awkward charm endearing, and he was impressed by her quick wit and easy laugh. Their relationship developed naturally, built on shared jokes, long conversations, and the comfortable feeling that they truly understood each other. Except Sarah had never mentioned that she could put 3 bullets through the center of a target at 800 yards in varying wind conditions. She'd never explained why she always seemed to know exactly what was happening around them, why she could spot trouble before it started, or why her reflexes were faster than seemed normal for a math teacher from Colorado. James knew she was intelligent and observant. He knew she stayed calm under pressure and had an almost supernatural sense of direction. But he thought these were just personality traits, not skills that had been carefully developed through years of training he knew nothing about. The secret had started as a smaller mission and grown into something larger over time. How do you casually mention to your husband that you're one of the best marksmen he'll ever meet? How do you explain that while he was learning military tactics in basic training, you had already mastered most of them in your father's private courses that officially never existed? The plane finally landed in a grey dawn at a military airfield outside Prague. Sarah gathered her small bag and walked across the tarmac, feeling the weight of the hidden compartment sewn into the lining. Her father's tools had been carefully disassembled and distributed throughout her luggage in ways that would pass any inspection. Most people would see spare parts for a sewing machine, replacement hardware for reading glasses, or components for a portable telescope. Someone who knew what to look for would recognize the pieces of one of the most advanced sniper rifles ever created. Captain Williams met her at the base gate. He was younger than she had expected, with tired eyes and the careful manner of someone dealing with a situation that was spiraling beyond his control. Mrs. What? Martinez, thank you for coming so quickly. I know this must be frightening for you. Sarah nodded, playing the role of the worried wife perfectly. Where's James? When can I see him? Soon. First, we need to brief you on the security situation. The region where your husband was stationed has become increasingly dangerous. We've had to relocate him to a more secure facility, but even that may be temporary. They drove through Prague in an unmarked car, then continued east toward the mountains. Captain Williams explained that James had been part of a routine patrol when they discovered what appeared to be a weapons cache in an abandoned village. When they investigated further, they found evidence of a much larger operation involving arms smuggling, human trafficking, and several groups that officially didn't exist. Unfortunately, someone doesn't want this information to come to light. There have been 3 attempts to eliminate the soldiers who were present during that patrol. We've managed to keep James safe so far, but resources are limited and the threats are escalating. Sarah listened carefully, filing away details about routes, timing, and personnel. What kind of threats? Professional ones. These aren't local criminals or political extremists. Someone with significant resources and military-grade equipment is trying very hard to make sure this story never reaches the outside world. They drove for hours through increasingly remote countryside. Sarah noticed the checkpoints, the patrol patterns, and the way Captain Williams kept checking his mirrors. She also noticed when they picked up a tail about an hour outside Prague, and when that tail was replaced by a different vehicle 20 minutes later. She didn't mention any of this. The safe house was actually a small military outpost built into a hillside, surrounded by forests and accessible only by a single winding road. It was the kind of place that could be easily defended by a few people who knew what they were doing, but could also become a trap if those people were outnumbered or outgunned. James was waiting for her in a small room that had probably been designed as an office. When he saw her, his face lit up with relief and something close to surprise, as if he hadn't quite believed she would actually come. They held each other for a long time without talking. Are you hurt? She asked finally, stepping back to look at him. Some bruises, nothing serious. Sarah, I'm so sorry you got dragged into this. I never thought. He shook his head. I should have been more careful. Tell me what happened. James explained about the patrol, the discovery, and the attacks that followed. As he spoke, Sarah found herself automatically calculating defensive positions, escape routes, and the tactical challenges of protecting this location. It was an old habit that had served her well in competitions and training scenarios, but this was the first time she had ever applied those skills to a real situation involving people she cared about. How many people know you're here? She asked. Just our unit and the command structure. Why? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about the surveillance they had encountered on the drive, about Captain Williams's nervous energy, and about the feeling she couldn't shake that they were being watched even now. James, I need you to trust me about something. I know this might sound strange, but I think we may need to leave here soon. Leave? Sarah, this is the safest place we can be right now. The whole outpost is designed to protect us. I know. But sometimes the safest place becomes the most dangerous place, especially when other people know where it is. James looked at her with confusion and something that might have been the beginning of realization. After 3 years of marriage, he was finally starting to understand that his wife might not be exactly who he thought she was. Outside the small window, the sun was setting behind the mountains. In a few hours, it would be completely dark. And in that darkness, Sarah Martinez was about to discover whether the skills her father had taught her in their backyard in Colorado would be enough to keep them alive in the mountains of Eastern Europe. The attack would begin at 2:17 a.m. Sarah didn't know this yet, but her instincts were already preparing for what was coming. And for the first time in her marriage, she was going to have to decide whether keeping her secrets was more important than keeping her husband alive. The outpost fell into an uneasy quiet as evening settled over the mountains. Sarah sat by the window in their assigned quarters, watching the forest line while James tried to get some rest on the narrow military cot. She had insisted on taking the first watch, claiming that travel anxiety was keeping her awake anyway. James had accepted this explanation, though she could see questions forming behind his tired eyes. The truth was that Sarah's internal alarm system was screaming warnings she couldn't ignore. Every instinct her father had trained into her was suggesting that their current situation was far more precarious than anyone realized. The outpost might look secure, but it was also isolated and predictable. If someone wanted to eliminate the witnesses to whatever James had discovered, this would be the perfect place to do it quietly and thoroughly. She had spent the afternoon casually exploring the facility, mapping exits and defensive positions while appearing to be nothing more than a nervous wife getting familiar with her temporary surroundings. The outpost was well designed but undermanned. There were only 8 soldiers present, plus Captain Williams and 2 other officers. Against a determined assault by professional forces, those numbers would not be sufficient. More troubling was what she had observed about the personnel. Captain Williams was competent but inexperienced in this type of situation. The soldiers were well trained for conventional operations but seemed unprepared for the kind of threat they were actually facing. And everyone was operating under the assumption that their location remained secret, despite evidence that suggested otherwise. Sarah had noticed the small things that others missed. The way the radio communications seemed to follow predictable patterns that could be easily monitored. The fact that supply deliveries were scheduled at regular intervals along routes that never varied. Most concerning of all, she had spotted signs of recent surveillance in the woods surrounding the outpost, disturbed vegetation, improvised observation posts, and movement patterns that suggested professional reconnaissance. Someone had been watching this place for days, possibly weeks. At 11:30 p.m., she quietly retrieved her suitcase and began the careful process of assembling her equipment. The rifle components came together with the smooth precision of a puzzle she had solved countless times before. Her father's design was elegant in its simplicity. A weapon that could be completely disassembled for transport but reassembled quickly by someone who knew the system. The finished rifle was a work of art, custom-built for accuracy at extreme range, with modifications that existed nowhere else in the world. Sarah ran her hands along the familiar surfaces, checking the scope alignment and testing the action. Everything was exactly as she had left it. She had never expected to use this weapon outside of controlled training environments. Her father had built it as a teaching tool, something to help her understand the theoretical limits of precision shooting. The competitions she had won were with standard equipment, deliberately handicapping herself to avoid unwanted attention. This rifle represented capabilities that she had never revealed to anyone. James stirred in his sleep, and Sarah quickly covered the weapon with a blanket. She wasn't ready for that conversation yet, though she suspected it was coming soon, whether she wanted it or not. At 1:45 a.m., the attack began. It started with the communications going down. Not dramatically, but gradually, in a way that might have seemed like routine technical problems if you weren't expecting trouble. Sarah noticed immediately when the periodic radio checks stopped following their established pattern. Then the perimeter sensors began failing one by one, each outage explained away by the duty officer as equipment malfunctions or weather interference. Sarah moved to James and gently shook him awake. "We have company," she whispered. "What are you talking about?" "Someone is systematically disabling our early warning systems. In about 10 minutes, this place is going to be under attack." James sat up quickly, instantly alert. 3 years of marriage hadn't changed his soldier's reflexes. "How do you know that?" "I've been monitoring the radio traffic and watching the security indicators. Trust me on this." "Sarah, you're a math teacher. How would you know how to monitor military communications?" She looked at him steadily. "James, there are things about me that we need to discuss, but not right now. Right now, we need to get out of this building and find a defensive position before they cut us off completely." Before he could respond, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. From somewhere outside came the sound of muffled explosions, not the dramatic booms of action movies, but the professional pops of charges designed to disable equipment without creating unnecessary noise. Captain Williams's voice echoed through the corridors. All personnel to defensive positions. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Sarah was already moving, slinging the assembled rifle across her back and gathering the additional equipment she might need. James stared at her in shock as the pieces of her deception became visible. "Sarah, what the hell is that?" "Later," she said firmly. "Right now, I need you to follow my instructions exactly." "Can you do that?" The sound of gunfire erupted from the main entrance. Controlled bursts from professional weapons, answered by the heavier fire of the outpost's defensive positions. Sarah listened to the rhythm of the engagement, automatically analyzing the tactical situation from the audio signatures alone. "They're using suppressed weapons and coordinated movement patterns," she said, almost to herself. "At least 12 attackers, probably more. They've got the main entrance pinned down and they're moving to surround the building. How can you possibly know that from just listening?" Sarah turned to face her husband, and for the first time in their relationship, he saw her without any masks or pretenses. The worried math teacher was gone, replaced by someone he didn't recognize. Someone with cold, calculating eyes and the fluid movements of a trained operator. "James, my father wasn't a mechanic. He spent 20 years in special operations, and he trained me from childhood in skills that most people never learn. I've been competing in precision shooting competitions since I was 16, and I've won more of them than you would believe. I can calculate range, windage, and trajectory in my head faster than most people can use a calculator. And right now, those skills might be the only thing standing between us and a very unpleasant death." The sound of fighting was getting closer. Sarah could hear boots in the corridors, voices shouting tactical instructions, and the particular sound of a building being systematically cleared by people who knew what they were doing. "We need to move. Now." She led him through a series of maintenance passages that she had memorized during her afternoon exploration. The outpost had been built into the hillside, which meant there were several ways to reach the outside without using the main corridors. More importantly, the elevated position would give her the high ground advantage she needed to use her weapon effectively. They emerged onto a rocky outcropping about 50 yards above the main building. From here, Sarah could see the entire tactical situation with perfect clarity. The attacking force had the outpost completely surrounded, using night vision equipment and coordinated assault tactics to methodically eliminate resistance. These weren't random criminals or local insurgents. They were military professionals with expensive equipment and extensive training. "Stay low and don't move," Sarah instructed James. She settled into a prone shooting position, adjusting the rifle's bipod and checking her scope settings. The first shot was at 340 yards, targeting a sniper who had been systematically picking off the outpost's defenders from a concealed position in the tree line. Sarah's bullet took him cleanly, dropping him before he even knew he was being engaged. The second shot was at 425 yards, eliminating a machine gunner who was providing suppressive fire for an assault team approaching the main entrance. Again, the target dropped instantly, causing immediate confusion among his teammates who couldn't locate the source of the shots. James watched in stunned silence as his wife began systematically dismantling the attack with surgical precision. Each shot was calculated, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. She moved the rifle smoothly between targets, never hesitating, never missing, working with the calm professionalism of someone who had trained for this scenario her entire life. "Sarah," he whispered. "Who are you?" She didn't answer immediately, focusing on a particularly challenging shot at nearly 500 yards. The target was partially concealed behind cover, visible only intermittently as he directed his team's assault. Sarah waited patiently for the right moment, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger at the exact instant when her target exposed himself to give hand signals to his unit. The shot was perfect. "I'm your wife," she said finally, already moving to acquire her next target. "But I'm also someone who learned a long time ago that the world is more dangerous than most people realize, and that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to be more dangerous than the people who want to hurt them." The attacking force was beginning to realize that they were being engaged by a sniper of exceptional skill. Sarah could see them reorganizing, trying to locate her position while maintaining their assault on the outpost. But they had trained for overwhelming a lightly defended position, not for dealing with precision fire from an elevated position by someone who could drop their personnel faster than they could replace them. Captain Williams and his soldiers were using the disruption to mount an effective defense. With the machine gun positions eliminated and several key assault leaders down, the attackers were losing their tactical advantage. The tide of the battle was turning. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Professional operations like this one always had contingency plans, backup teams, and resources that wouldn't be revealed until the primary assault failed. The people behind this attack had invested too much in silencing James and his unit to give up after losing one engagement. She continued to work methodically, picking off targets of opportunity while monitoring the overall tactical situation. Her ammunition was limited, so every shot had to count. More importantly, she was trying to create enough confusion and casualties among the attacking force to make them withdraw and reconsider their approach. At 3:15 a.m., it worked. The surviving attackers began falling back to predetermined rally points, carrying their wounded and leaving their dead. Within 10 minutes, the forest around the outpost was quiet again. But Sarah didn't relax. This was a tactical withdrawal, not a defeat. They would be back, probably in greater numbers and with a better understanding of what they were facing. "Is it over?" James asked. Sarah was already disassembling her rifle, preparing for the next phase of what was going to be a very long night. "No," she said. "It's just beginning." Dawn broke grey and cold over the mountains, revealing the aftermath of the night's violence. The outpost's courtyard was scarred with bullet holes and scorch marks from explosive charges. 3 soldiers had been wounded during the initial assault, though none seriously thanks to Sarah's intervention. The attacking force had left behind 4 bodies and enough equipment to confirm what everyone already suspected. This had been a professional military operation, funded by someone with substantial resources. Captain Williams found Sarah and James in the makeshift command post that had been established in the outpost's most secure room. Sarah was studying tactical maps of the surrounding area, while James sat quietly nearby, still processing the revelation that his wife was someone entirely different from the woman he thought he had married. "Mrs. Martinez," Captain Williams began, then stopped, clearly uncertain how to address someone who had just saved his entire unit while maintaining the pretense of being a civilian math teacher. "I need to ask you some questions." "I'm sure you do," Sarah replied without looking up from the maps. "But first, we need to discuss our immediate tactical situation. The people who attacked us last night aren't going to give up because they lost one engagement. They'll be back with more personnel and a better understanding of our capabilities." "Our capabilities." Captain Williams emphasized the word meaningfully. Sarah finally looked at him directly. "Captain, I understand that my presence here has created complications for you. I'm a civilian with no official status and skills that I can't easily explain. But right now, those skills are probably the only reason any of us are still alive. So I suggest we focus on staying alive for the next 24 hours, and then we can sort out the paperwork later." James spoke up for the first time since the attack. "Sarah, you need to tell us who you really are. These people deserve to know what they're dealing with." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing the consequences of full disclosure against the reality of their situation. Outside the window, soldiers were reinforcing defensive positions and treating wounded comrades. The secret she had kept for so many years suddenly seemed less important than the lives of the people around her. "My name is Sarah Elizabeth Martinez, and until yesterday I was a high school math teacher in Denver, Colorado. But before that, and sometimes still, I'm someone my father trained to be a precision marksman from the age of 12. He spent 20 years in special operations, mostly in places that officially don't exist, doing jobs that were never recorded. When he retired, he bought property in the mountains outside Colorado Springs and spent the next 15 years teaching me everything he had learned about survival, tactics, and what he called the skills you hope you never need." She pulled out a small notebook filled with range cards, wind calculations, and other technical data that she had been compiling since their arrival. "I've been competing in precision shooting competitions since I was 16, usually under my maiden name and always keeping a very low profile. I hold several records that most people don't know about because the organizations that track them prefer to keep certain capabilities private. My father's rifle, which you saw last night, is capable of reliable accuracy to distances that most military snipers would consider impossible." Captain Williams studied the notebook, recognizing the professional quality of her observations and calculations. "Why didn't you tell anyone about these abilities?" "Because having these skills as a civilian creates complications. People get nervous when they discover that the quiet woman who teaches their children math can also put a bullet through a target at half a mile. It's easier to live a normal life when people don't know what you're capable of." James was staring at her with an expression that mixed admiration, confusion, and hurt. "Sarah, we've been married for 3 years. How could you keep something like this secret for so long?" "The same way you kept your deployment details secret from me. The same way Captain Williams probably has clearances and knowledge that he can't discuss with his family. Some secrets exist to protect people, not to deceive them." "This is different, is it? You married a math teacher from Colorado who seemed normal and safe and predictable. If you had known that I could kill someone from half a mile away, would you have asked me to marry you?" James didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission from the main command post in Prague. Captain Williams answered, listened for several minutes, then signed off with grin expression. That was Colonel Reynolds. "Intelligence suggests that the attack last night was carried out by a private military contractor with connections to several international arms dealers. They're being paid to eliminate anyone with knowledge of what your patrol discovered, James. The weapons cache you found was apparently much more significant than we initially realized." "How significant?" Sarah asked. "Significant enough that someone is willing to spend millions of dollars to keep it secret. The attack last night probably cost them more than most countries spend on their entire annual defense budget. That level of investment suggests that whatever you found threatens something much larger than a simple smuggling operation." Sarah studied the tactical maps again, this time with a different perspective. "If they're willing to spend that kind of money, then they'll be back. Probably today, and probably with enough people to overwhelm any defensive position we can establish here, which is why we're being evacuated. Transport helicopters en route to extract everyone to a more secure facility." "When?" 1600 hours. Sarah checked her watch. It was currently 8:30, which meant they had less than 8 hours to hold their position against an enemy with unlimited resources and professional military capabilities. She looked around the command post, calculating the tactical challenges they faced. "Captain, I need to see the planned extraction route and the security arrangements for the helicopters." "Damage?" "Martinez, you're not military personnel. I can't share operational details with a civilian. Yesterday I was a civilian. Today I'm the person who saved your unit from being overrun by professional killers. Which designation do you think is more relevant to our current situation?" Captain Williams hesitated, clearly struggling with regulations that hadn't been designed to address their current circumstances. James intervened. "Captain, my wife has already demonstrated that she has skills and knowledge that exceed anyone else in this unit. If she says she can help with the tactical planning, I think we should listen to her." Sarah spent the next hour reviewing evacuation plans, studying aerial photographs of the extraction zone, and identifying the numerous ways that their planned rescue could be turned into an ambush. The more she learned about the operation, the more concerned she became. "This won't work," she finally announced. "The extraction zone is too predictable, too exposed, and too easy to set up a killing field around. If I were planning to eliminate this unit, I would let you get to the helicopters and then destroy them during takeoff when everyone was concentrated in one location." "So what do you suggest?" Sarah pointed to a different location on the map, a narrow valley about 2 miles north of the official extraction zone. "We changed the plan. Extract from here instead, using a route that takes us through terrain that favors defenders over attackers. It will be more difficult for the helicopters, but it will also be much harder for anyone to predict or interdict. I can't authorize changes to an operation that's already been approved and coordinated."
"Then get authorization."
"Because if we stick to the current plan, there's a very good chance that none of us will survive the day." Captain Williams radioed Prague to discuss the proposed changes, while Sarah continued studying the maps and terrain features. James sat beside her, watching her work with the focused intensity he had seen before but never understood. "How long have you been carrying that rifle around with you?" he asked quietly. "Since my father died 6 years ago. I promised him I would never be helpless, never be caught unprepared for the kind of world that actually exists, rather than the world most people think they live in." "You've been carrying it for 6 years and never mentioned it?" "James, how many times in 6 years have we faced a situation where precision shooting skills would have been relevant?"
"I'm a high school teacher in suburban Denver."
"Until yesterday, the most dangerous thing in my life was driving to work in snow. But you kept training, kept practicing." "Yes. Because my father taught me that skills deteriorate if you don't maintain them, and you never know when circumstances might change." The radio conversation with Prague was becoming heated. Sarah could hear Colonel Reynolds pushing back against the proposed changes to the extraction plan, citing coordination difficulties and the risks of deviating from established procedures. Captain Williams was trying to explain the tactical advantages of the alternative approach, but he lacked the technical expertise to make a compelling argument. Sarah took the radio microphone from Captain Williams. "Colonel Reynolds, this is Sarah Martinez. I need 60 seconds to explain why changing the extraction plan will save lives." "Mrs. Martinez, you're not authorized to participate in operational planning." "Colonel, last night I eliminated 11 hostile personnel and disrupted a coordinated assault that would have overrun your outpost and killed everyone present. I did this using skills and equipment that I've spent 15 years developing. under the guidance of a special operations veteran. Right now, those skills might be the only reason your people have a chance of surviving the day. So I'm asking you to listen to what I have to say, because the alternative is explaining to their families why you prioritize bureaucratic procedures over their lives. There was a long pause on the radio. Finally, Colonel Reynolds responded. You have 60 seconds. Sarah quickly outlined the tactical vulnerabilities of the planned extraction zone, the advantages of the alternative location, and the specific ways that a professional military force would likely attempt to intercept the evacuation. She spoke with the precise technical language of someone who understood military operations at a level that surprised everyone listening. When she finished, there was another long pause. Mrs. Carr. Martinez, what exactly was your father's name and unit designation? Master Sergeant Robert Elizabeth Mitchell, assigned to units and operations that remain classified. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could almost hear Colonel Reynolds checking databases and making phone calls. Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to ask you a question that you may not be able to answer. Does the designation Broken Arrow 7 mean anything to you? Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. Broken Arrow 7 had been her father's final operation, the one that ended his career and changed him into the careful, watchful man who had spent years teaching her to be ready for anything. Yes, sir. That was my father's last assignment before his retirement. And you're telling me that Master Sergeant Mitchell trained you personally in advanced tactical skills? For 15 years, sir. He said the world was more dangerous than most people realized, and that someday I might need to be more dangerous than the people who wanted to hurt my family. Mrs. Martinez, your extraction plan is approved. Captain Williams, implement the changes immediately and prepare for departure at 1400 hours instead of 1600. We're moving up the timeline because I suspect Mrs. Martinez is right about the intercept threat. Sarah handed the microphone back to Captain Williams, who was staring at her with a mixture of respect and wariness. What was Broken Arrow 7? James asked. Sarah was quiet for a long time, remembering her father's nightmares and the way he would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for weapons that weren't there. Something that went very badly wrong, and that my father spent the rest of his life making sure would never happen again. Outside the command post, soldiers were already beginning to implement the new extraction plan. They had less than 6 hours to move 2 miles through hostile territory and reach a pickup zone that would require helicopters to operate at the limits of their capabilities. But Sarah had bought them a chance, and sometimes a chance was all you needed. The question was whether it would be enough. The movement began at 1200 hours, 2 hours earlier than originally planned, and along a route that would test everyone's endurance and tactical discipline. Sarah had divided the unit into 3 groups, each taking a different path through the mountains toward the revised extraction zone. The separation would make them harder to track and eliminate as a single target, but it also meant that if one group encountered trouble, the others might not be able to provide support. Sarah and James traveled with Captain Williams and 3 soldiers, following what appeared to be an old hunting trail that wound through dense forest and rocky terrain. The path was challenging, but provided excellent concealment from aerial surveillance. Sarah had chosen it specifically because it would be difficult for vehicles or large groups to traverse quickly, giving them a tactical advantage if they were pursued. The first sign of trouble came at 12:45 hours when Sarah's group encountered evidence of recent human activity along the trail, disturbed vegetation, boot prints in soft earth, and the subtle signs that someone had been using this route for surveillance purposes. They've been watching all the approaches, Sarah whispered to Captain Williams. This wasn't just about attacking the outpost. They've been mapping our entire area of operations, probably for weeks. How many people would that require for this level of coverage? At least 30 personnel, probably more. And that's just for surveillance. The actual assault teams would be separate units. Captain Williams processed this information with growing unease. If the enemy had that many people in the area, then every possible route to the extraction zone was likely under observation. They were essentially trying to move through territory that had been turned into a carefully monitored killing field. Sarah studied the terrain ahead through a compact set of binoculars, looking for optimal positions where observers might be stationed. Her father had taught her to think like both hunter and prey, to anticipate where threats would position themselves, and how to exploit the gaps in their coverage. There. She pointed to a rocky outcropping about 400 yards ahead. That's where I would put a spotter to monitor this trail. Good visibility, multiple escape routes, and concealment from ground-level observation.
How do you want to handle it?
Sarah was already assembling her rifle, working with the smooth efficiency of someone who had performed this task countless times under various conditions. I'm going to eliminate the threat, and then we're going to move very quickly through the danger area before anyone realizes what happened. The shot was challenging, uphill, through variable wind conditions, at a target that was partially concealed and might not even exist. Sarah settled into a shooting position behind a fallen log, adjusted her scope for the estimated range and environmental conditions, and began the patient process of target identification. It took 12 minutes of careful observation before she spotted the glint of optical equipment among the rocks. The spotter was well concealed and disciplined, moving only occasionally to scan different sectors of the valley below. Sarah watched him long enough to establish his pattern of movement, then waited for the optimal moment to take the shot. The bullet traveled 394 yards in just over half a second, striking the target's center mass and dropping him instantly. Sarah was already disassembling her rifle before the sound of the shot finished echoing through the valley. "Move," she ordered, and the group began advancing rapidly along the trail. They had covered perhaps 200 yards when Sarah's radio crackled with a transmission from one of the other groups. Team 2, led by Sergeant Morrison, had encountered a vehicle checkpoint about half a mile from the extraction zone. The checkpoint appeared to be manned by local police, but the equipment and deployment patterns suggested military personnel using civilian cover. "We can't approach the LZ from this direction," Morrison reported. "They've got the approach routes blocked, and they're checking everyone who tries to pass through the area." Sarah consulted her map, calculating alternative routes and timing constraints. The helicopters were scheduled to arrive at the extraction zone in less than 2 hours, and there was no way to change the pickup time without compromising the aircraft and their crews. Team 2, fall back to Checkpoint Alpha and wait for further instructions. Team 3, what's your status? Team 3, the group with the wounded soldiers reported that they were making slow progress through difficult terrain but hadn't encountered any opposition so far. However, their pace meant they might not reach the extraction zone in time for the scheduled pickup. Sarah made a tactical decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "All teams, this is Martinez. I'm implementing Contingency Plan Delta. Teams 2 and 3 will proceed to the original extraction zone and prepare for pickup there. Team 1 will continue to the revised location and create a diversion to draw attention away from the main evacuation." Captain Williams stared at her. "Sarah, that's not a contingency plan we discussed. And you're talking like you're in command of this operation." "Because right now, I am." "Captain, with all due respect, you're an excellent officer, but you've never faced this type of situation before. The people we're dealing with are professionals who have planned for every conventional response we might make. Right now, our only advantage is doing something they don't expect." "What exactly are you proposing?" Sarah pointed to the original extraction zone on her map. "The enemy is expecting us to try to reach the revised location because they monitored our radio communications and know about the planned change. They've repositioned their forces accordingly, which means the original zone is now less heavily defended. Teams 2 and 3 can extract there, while we draw the bulk of their attention to the north. And what happens to us? We survive by being better at this than they are." James had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. "Sarah, you're talking about using ourselves as bait. That's not a tactical plan, that's suicide." "James, everything we've done since yesterday has been risky. But the alternative is letting those helicopters fly into an ambush that will kill everyone aboard plus everyone on the ground. Sometimes you have to choose between bad options and worse options." The radio crackled again with an urgent transmission from Team 3. They had spotted helicopter gunships conducting search patterns in the distance, military aircraft that weren't part of the planned evacuation. The enemy had air support, which changed the tactical situation completely. Sarah made rapid calculations, considering fuel ranges, flight times, and operational capabilities. Those aircraft are probably operating from a base within 50 miles of here, which means they have limited time on station but can return quickly with reinforcements. "We need to execute the extraction immediately, before they vector additional assets into the area." She switched to the command frequency and contacted Colonel Reynolds directly. "Prairie Dog 6, this is Broken Arrow 77. Request immediate extraction of Teams 2 and 3 from original LZ. Team 1 will provide diversion and extract via alternative means." 7-7, that's not the approved plan. Prairie Dog 6, the approved plan is compromised. Enemy forces have air support and have repositioned to intercept the revised extraction. Immediate execution is required to prevent loss of all personnel and aircraft. There was a pause, then Colonel Reynolds' voice came back with crisp authority. 7-7, you are authorized to execute. Extraction birds are inbound to original LZ, ETA 15 minutes. Good luck. Sarah turned to Captain Williams and her team. "Gentlemen, we have 15 minutes to create enough noise and confusion to convince a professional military force that the main escape attempt is happening 2 miles away from where it's actually taking place. Anyone have any creative ideas about how to accomplish that?
The answer came from an unexpected source.
Private Chen, the youngest member of their group, had been quietly observing their situation and thinking about the technical challenges involved. Ma'am, if we can simulate radio traffic from multiple units, set off some explosive charges to mimic combat, and provide precision fire against their observation posts, we might be able to convince them that a major breakout attempt is underway here.
Sarah smiled at him.
Private, that's exactly the kind of creative thinking this situation requires. Can you handle the radio deception? Yes, ma'am.
I can simulate communications from at least 3 different units using different frequencies and call signs. Captain Williams, do you have any explosive charges we can use for noise and distraction? We have demo charges for destroying sensitive equipment.
Not much, but enough to create some convincing explosions. And I'll provide precision fire against their forward positions to make them think they're under attack by a larger force than we actually have. James looked at the 3 military professionals, planning what amounted to an elaborate magic trick designed to fool people who were trying to kill them.
This is insane.
Yes, Sarah agreed.
But insane plans sometimes work because they're the last thing anyone expects. The next 15 minutes were among the most intense of Sarah's life. While Private Chen created phantom radio traffic and Captain Williams positioned explosive charges at strategic locations, Sarah methodically engaged enemy observation posts and patrol units from multiple firing positions, creating the impression of a coordinated attack by superior forces. Her first shot eliminated a spotter who was directing search aircraft toward the original extraction zone. Her second shot disabled a communications vehicle that was coordinating ground units. Her third and fourth shots forced an entire patrol to take cover and call for reinforcements, convincing them they were under assault by a sniper team rather than a single shooter. Between shots, she moved rapidly between positions, using terrain features and natural concealment to avoid detection while maintaining the illusion that multiple snipers were operating in the area. It was exhausting work that required perfect shot placement and constant movement, but it was exactly the kind of challenge her father had prepared her for. The explosive charges detonated in sequence, creating the sound signature of a major firefight. Combined with Private Chen's radio deception and Sarah's precision fire, the effect was convincing enough to draw the bulk of the enemy's forces toward their position. Through her scope, Sarah could see helicopter gunships changing course toward their location, ground units converging on their area, and communications vehicles working frantically to coordinate the response to what they believed was the main breakout attempt. 2 miles away, Teams 2 and 3 were successfully extracted without encountering opposition.
Prairie Dog 6, this is Team 2 actual. Package secure, all personnel aboard, departing area.
Sarah felt a moment of profound relief. Whatever happened to her group now, James's unit and the wounded soldiers were safe.
7-7, this is Prairie Dog 6. Extraction complete.
What's your status?
Sarah looked around at the tactical situation they had created for themselves. They were now the focus of attention for a professional military force with air support, superior numbers, and intimate knowledge of the local terrain.
Their ammunition was running low. Their position was partially compromised, and their escape routes were limited. Prairie Dog 6, we're about to get very busy down here.
7. Out. She turned to Captain Williams, James, and Private Chen. Gentlemen, we've successfully completed the primary mission. Everyone else is safe. Now we just need to figure out how to survive the next hour so we can go home and tell people about it. The sound of approaching helicopters was getting louder. Sarah estimated they had perhaps 5 minutes before the area would be swarming with hostile forces.
Time to go, she announced, and began leading them deeper into the mountains towards terrain that might give them a fighting chance. Behind them, the enemy was converging on positions they had already abandoned. Ahead lay some of the most challenging terrain in Eastern Europe and the slim possibility that 4 people with limited ammunition and no backup could outrun an entire army. But Sarah had learned long ago that sometimes the impossible was just another word for something that required exceptional skill and perfect execution. And she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The pursuit began in earnest at 15:30 hours, when the enemy forces realized they had been deceived and began systematically searching the mountains for Sarah's group. The helicopter gunships established a search pattern that covered every possible escape route, while ground units moved in coordinated sweeps designed to drive the fugitives toward predetermined kill zones. Sarah led her small team higher into the mountains, following terrain features that provided concealment from aerial observation, while avoiding the obvious paths that search teams would prioritize. The climbing was brutal. Steep slopes, loose rock, and thin air that left everyone except Sarah struggling to maintain pace. Where did you learn to move through terrain like this?
Captain Williams gasped during one of their brief rest stops. Colorado Rockies, Sarah replied, barely breathing hard despite carrying the heaviest pack. My father believed that physical conditioning was just as important as marksmanship skills. We used to do 100-mile hikes through terrain that makes this look like a nature walk. James was staring at her with the expression of someone discovering that a familiar landscape had completely changed while he wasn't looking. Sarah, I'm beginning to realize that I don't know you at all. James, you know the parts of me that matter most. You know that I love teaching kids who think they can't learn math. You know that I cry during sad movies and that I make terrible coffee but excellent pancakes. You know that I would do anything to protect the people I care about. Those things haven't changed. But you're also someone who can disappear into mountains with a rifle and eliminate professional soldiers like it's a normal day at the office.
Yes.
But that's not who I am. That's just something I can do when I have to. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a helicopter approaching their position. Sarah quickly guided the group into a depression between two large boulders, where they huddled motionless while the aircraft passed overhead. The pilot was conducting a visual search pattern, flying low enough that they could see the door gunner scanning the terrain with optical equipment. After the helicopter moved away, Sarah studied her tactical map and calculated their options. They were currently about 8 miles from the nearest friendly forces, with difficult terrain and an unknown number of hostile personnel between them and safety. Their ammunition was limited. Their food and water wouldn't last more than another day, and the search effort pursuing them was becoming more sophisticated as time passed.
We need to change our approach, she announced. Right now we're running away from them, which means they're controlling the engagement and forcing us to react to their initiatives.
We need to become the hunters instead of the prey. Private Chen looked puzzled. Ma'am, there are 4 of us, and probably 50 of them. How do we become the hunters? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, James saw a hint of the excitement she used to show when solving particularly challenging math problems. Because hunting isn't about numbers. It's about information, patience, and being in the right place at exactly the right time. They have more people, but we know something they don't. Which is, we know that they're looking for us, but they don't know that we're about to start looking for them. Over the next hour, Sarah transformed their escape into a methodical intelligence-gathering operation. Using her binoculars and the elevated terrain, she began mapping the enemy search patterns, identifying command posts, and locating the vulnerable points in their operation. The hostile forces were well organized and equipped, but they were operating according to standard search and pursuit protocols. Those protocols were predictable to someone who understood military tactics, which meant they could be exploited by people willing to take calculated risks. Sarah's first target was a communications relay station that had been established on a prominent hill about 1,200 yards from their position. The station was coordinating the helicopter searches and ground unit movements, making it the nerve center of the entire operation. Eliminating it would blind the search effort and create confusion that might last long enough for them to escape. The shot was at the extreme range of her capabilities, across a valley with variable wind conditions and at a target that was partially concealed behind defensive barriers. Sarah spent 30 minutes studying the wind patterns, calculating trajectory, and waiting for the optimal moment when atmospheric conditions would give her the best chance of success. When she finally fired, the bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds before striking the radio operator's center mass. The communications station went silent immediately, and within minutes, Sarah could observe the confusion spreading through the search operation as units lost contact with their coordination center. Move, she ordered, and the group began descending toward the valley floor, using routes that would have been suicidal 10 minutes earlier but were now temporarily safe due to the disruption she had created. They covered 2 miles in 40 minutes, moving fast through terrain that the search teams had already cleared and were unlikely to revisit quickly. Sarah's tactical gamble was paying off. By attacking the enemy's command and control capabilities, she had created gaps in their coverage that could be exploited by people who understood the timing involved. The second target was a vehicle checkpoint that was blocking one of the main routes toward friendly territory. Sarah positioned her team on high ground overlooking the checkpoint, then systematically eliminated the personnel manning the position with precision fire from concealed positions. Unlike her previous engagements, this attack was designed to look like the work of a large, well-equipped unit rather than a single sniper. Sarah fired from multiple positions, used different firing intervals, and created sound signatures that would suggest several shooters working in coordination. The deception worked perfectly. The surviving enemy personnel radioed reports of contact with a reinforced sniper team and requested immediate reinforcement. Within an hour, the bulk of the search effort was converging on the checkpoint area, leaving other routes temporarily undefended.
This is actually working. Captain Williams observed as they watched enemy units rushing toward the wrong location. "Of course it's working," Sarah replied. "My father spent 15 years teaching me that most tactical problems have solutions if you're willing to think about them differently than everyone else expects." By evening, they had covered 6 miles and eliminated the most significant obstacles between them and friendly territory. Sarah's unconventional approach had turned their desperate escape into a series of calculated tactical victories that steadily improved their position while degrading the enemy's capability to maintain pursuit. But as darkness fell, she knew their luck was beginning to run out. The enemy forces were adapting to her tactics, bringing in additional personnel and equipment, and beginning to understand that they were dealing with capabilities far beyond what they had initially expected. The final challenge came at 2200 hours, when they encountered a heavily defended roadblock, manned by what appeared to be an entire platoon of professional soldiers. The position was too strong to attack directly and too well positioned to bypass easily. For the first time since the crisis began, Sarah found herself facing a tactical problem that couldn't be solved with precision shooting and clever maneuvering. She studied the enemy position through her binoculars, identifying firing positions, estimating personnel strength, and looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. What she saw was a textbook defensive setup with overlapping fields of fire, multiple backup positions, and enough firepower to stop anything short of a major military assault. "I count at least 20 personnel with heavy weapons and prepared positions," she reported. "This isn't something we can fight our way through." "So, what do we do?" James asked. Sarah was quiet for a long time, considering options that ranged from risky to impossible. Finally, she made a decision that surprised even herself. "We surrender." The others stared at her in shock. "Sarah, these people are trying to kill us." "We can't just walk up and surrender. We're not surrendering to them. We're surrendering to the people who are about to arrest them." She pointed to movement in the woods beyond the roadblock, carefully concealed figures in different uniforms who were positioning themselves for what appeared to be an assault on the enemy position. "Those are Czech military personnel. Special forces, probably, based on their equipment and movement patterns. They've been tracking this private military operation just like we have, and they're about to shut it down." Sarah keyed her radio to an emergency frequency and began broadcasting in clear English. "Czech military forces. This is a group of 4 American personnel requesting assistance. We are located approximately 200 meters south of the roadblock you are preparing to assault. We are non-combatants seeking to reach friendly territory, and we have information about the hostile forces you are engaging." The response came immediately. "American personnel, this is Czech Special Forces. Remain in position and identify yourselves. We are beginning our assault in 2 minutes." Sarah and her group took cover behind a rocky ridge and watched as professional soldiers executed a perfectly coordinated night assault on the roadblock. The engagement was brief, violent, and completely one-sided. Within 10 minutes, the private military forces that had been pursuing them for hours were either dead, wounded, or surrendering to Czech authorities. The Czech commander, a colonel named Dvorak, found them 20 minutes later. He was a compact, efficient man who spoke excellent English and seemed unsurprised to encounter American civilians in the middle of a military operation. "Mrs. Martinez, I believe? Colonel Reynolds in Prague has been very interested in speaking with you."
I imagine he has. Colonel, how did you know we were here? We've been tracking this private military operation for 2 weeks.
When we intercepted communications about an American sniper eliminating multiple hostile personnel and conducting tactical deception operations, we became very interested in meeting this person. James looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. "Even the Czech military knows about you now." "James, I think by tomorrow morning a lot of people are going to know about me. The question is what we're going to do about that." The helicopter flight back to Prague took 40 minutes, during which Sarah stared out the window at the mountains where she had spent the most intense day of her life. She had used skills her father taught her, made tactical decisions that saved multiple lives, and discovered capabilities within herself that she hadn't fully understood before. But more importantly, she had finally answered the question that had been haunting her since childhood. When the moment came to choose between the safe, normal life she had built and the dangerous skills her father had given her, which would she choose? The answer, it turned out, was that she didn't have to choose. She could be both a math teacher from Colorado and someone capable of extraordinary things when extraordinary things were required. The secret wasn't about hiding one identity or the other. It was about understanding when each was needed and being ready to become whoever the situation demanded. As they approached Prague, Sarah reached over and took James's hand. "Are we going to be okay?" James squeezed her fingers and smiled. "Sarah, I married someone I thought I knew completely, and it turns out I married someone far more remarkable than I ever imagined. I think we're going to be better than okay." Even though I kept secrets from you? You kept skills from me, not secrets. There's a difference. You're still the woman who makes terrible coffee and excellent pancakes. You're still the woman who cries during sad movies and believes that every kid can learn math if someone takes the time to show them how. You're just also someone who can do impossible things when people need impossible things done. Sarah leaned against his shoulder and closed her eyes. Tomorrow there would be debriefings, questions, and decisions about how to integrate her capabilities with official operations. There would be discussions about security clearances, training programs, and the possibility that her quiet life in Denver might be permanently changed. But tonight she was just Sarah Martinez, math teacher, wife, and someone who had discovered that the skills you hope you never need sometimes turn out to be exactly the skills that save everyone you care about. The helicopter touched down in Prague as the sun was rising over the city, marking the end of the most extraordinary 48 hours of her life. Sarah gathered her equipment, took James's hand, and walked toward whatever came next, with the confidence of someone who finally understood exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Behind them, in the mountains of Eastern Europe, the story was already becoming legend. The tale of the math teacher who turned out to be one of the most capable snipers anyone had ever encountered, and who used those skills to turn an ambush into a rescue and a desperate escape into a tactical masterpiece. But Sarah wasn't thinking about legends or stories. She was thinking about going home, making pancakes for breakfast, and maybe finally telling James about the shooting competition she had been winning for the past 15 years. After all, they had time now, and some secrets she had learned were meant to be shared with the people who loved you enough to understand that everyone is more than they appear to be, and that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary places, waiting for the moment when the world needs them to be extraordinary. That moment had come and gone. Sarah Martinez had risen to meet it. And now, finally, she could go home.